As I go through today, if you have any questions, use the question and answer part of the Zoom interface to send those in. And depending on what the question is, I will either answer it as we go or save it till the end. Today's presentation is pretty brief, and I think you'll see why that is as we go through here. So we're not going to be having to deal with me for much longer. We're just going to go through here. I'm going to start by talking about Wi-Fi 7, just a couple of slides for those of you that may have missed some of our other, educational presentations on what Wi-Fi 7 is. So Wi-Fi 7, otherwise known as 802.11be, is the latest Wi-Fi standard that's out there. Now, one of the cool features about Wi-Fi 7 is that it opens up a new band of spectrum for us, 6 gigahertz. So historically, we've been stuck when it comes to Wi-Fi, initially using 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and that's been the case for over 20 years. That was the amount of bandwidth that we had available. So a couple years ago, the FCC opened up 6 gigahertz space. So the initial transition to 6 gigahertz was Wi-Fi 6E products, and now we've got Wi-Fi 7, which also supports 6 gigahertz. So the big benefit of 6 gigahertz versus 2.4 and 5 gigahertz is the amount of bandwidth that's available. You've got more bandwidth available in the US on 6 gigahertz than you have on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz combined. So this opens up more bandwidth, means you can have more access points before you run into issues with them interfering with each other due to overlapping channels. It can mean using larger channels when you broadcast, so using more bandwidth per user so you can get faster speeds. So just to give you an idea here, these are 160 megahertz channels. So that's the biggest channel that's available in Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E. And as you can see, when it comes to 5 gigahertz, there are only 2 of those channels available, and both of those channels overlap with DFS. So as many of you that have been selling Wi-Fi for a while may know, DFS is not supported on all client devices. So just by default, if you're using 160 megahertz channels, some of your users are not going to be able to connect because they don't support DFS. And then on top of that, you've only got 2 channels available, which have to be shared by every access point and wireless device in the area. So you very quickly run into issues with interference. Whereas you see here, when it comes to 6 gigahertz, you've got 7 non-overlapping 160 megahertz channels that can be used. So you can have 7 access points operating at full speed without any sort of interference issues. And what this also opens up for us now with Wi-Fi 7 is doubling these channels to 320 megahertz. So now you've got 3 non-overlapping 320 megahertz channels if you have applications that need that level of speed and bandwidth available. Some of the other technologies that are new in Wi-Fi 7 are increased QAM, so 4096-bit QAM versus 1024-bit QAM in Wi-Fi 6. And so this just has to do with how they're encoding data onto those radio waves. This basically gives us about a 20% performance improvement over 1024-bit QAM. We've added support for multi-link operation, MLO. So traditionally, your client device has one radio in it. It connects to your access point on one of the radios the access point has. So it doesn't matter if your access point has 2 radios or 3 radios, each user is only connecting to one of those radios at a time. So MLO, or multi-link operation, now allows client devices to be able to connect to multiple radios in the access point simultaneously. So you can have one device with 2 connections simultaneously to that same access point. Right now, all of the MLO stuff that is out there is just 2 radios. I'm not aware of anything that's available or anything in the pipeline that's going to support 3-channel MLO, but for right now, you've got 2. So that allows your device to connect to, say, the 2.4 and the 6 gigahertz radio, or the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz radio at the same times. And the benefits of that are several fold here. So one is you can now combine your bandwidth between those 2 radios and get an even faster connection than you had before. The other benefit of using MLO is, instead of increasing your bandwidth, instead what you can do is lower your latency. So one of the issues we have with Wi-Fi is using unlicensed spectrum, and there's always going to be some level of interference causing packets to get dropped. So with MLO, one of the things you can do is you can simultaneously broadcast the same data on two different radios. So if one of those radios drops some packets because of interference, hopefully those same packets will go through on the other radio. So you don't have to wait for them to be rebroadcast, lowering your overall latency and jitter. So it's very similar to how some of the SD-WAN stuff works to speed up those long distance connections over the internet. Same sort of thing now with your Wi-Fi. And then the other new technology is called multi-RU puncturing. So traditionally, when you're broadcasting a larger channel, you're broadcasting, say, 160 megahertz channel. If it overlaps with another device nearby that's broadcasting an overlapping but only 40 megahertz channel, you've basically got interference across all of the data that you're being sent. So with multi-RU puncturing, your device can now see, oh, I'm overlapping with this other device, but that overlap is only 40 megahertz. And you can basically create a hole in the 160 megahertz channel you're using, turning it into essentially a 120 megahertz channel. So you can continue broadcasting without having to worry about loss of data due to interference with that 40 megahertz channel that's out there. So now we'll start talking about the hardware itself. So the WBE530 is our new access point. It is available through all of our distributors currently. So this can be ordered and purchased today. It is available for you. So this is a Nebula Flex Pro access point. So that means it can be used as a standalone access point. It can be used as a cloud managed access point, but also it can be used as a local controller access point. So if you are using one of our older NXCs or you're using one of our USG Flex, ATP series security gateways, those have the ability to also function as a local wireless LAN controller. So Nebula Flex Pro tells you this access point can be managed by that local area controller. In addition to that, because it's Nebula Flex Pro, it does come bundled with 1 year of Nebula Pro Pack when you buy the device itself. Other than that, very similar to our NWA 130 BE, in that it's a tri-radio, 2.4, 5 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz. Wi-Fi 7 access point operating at data rates up to BE 11,000. It's got advanced RF filters in there, specifically designed to filter out interference from neighboring channels, as well as interference from cellular interference. So what many people aren't aware of is that a lot of your 5G and 4G LTE cellular signals are using channels that bump up against Wi-Fi channels. And sometimes because of the power of those broadcasts, the edge of those channels can bleed over and cause Wi-Fi interference, especially if you're doing deployments of Wi-Fi in large buildings. So cellular doesn't penetrate that well into buildings. So what happens in most of your larger apartment buildings, hotels, conference centers, things like that, is they use what's called a DAS system, DAS. And it takes the Wi-Fi signal from outside and then rebroadcasts it inside the building, basically acting as a bridge between your cellular device and the cellular towers outside the building. So when you've got those buildings, they've got their own cellular access points that are often positioned just due to where the cable drops are, very close to where you're also dropping your access points, broadcasting on neighboring channels with very high output power. So that can cause interference if you don't have that RF filtering technology built in. So you will notice with all of our Wi-Fi 7 tri-radio access points, they are now in a rectangular housing instead of the more square or round housing that we'd use traditionally. And this just has to do because we're using a 3-radio device. By creating this longer rectangular access point, we can space out where those radios are on the board, and it helps reduce co-channel interference and signal-to-noise issues inside the device itself. The access point has two 2.5 gig Ethernet ports. One is your in port, which is where the PoE comes in to power up your access point and provides the uplink to the rest of your network. And then that second port can be used to daisy chain to something else nearby that doesn't need PoE power. So you can run one cable to the room, plug it into the access point, and then run a second cable out of the access point to a desktop PC or a smart TV or some other device without needing to do two cable drops. You can just do one drop to the room and then one drop from the access point to the device that needs to be connected. So this access point itself, it requires 802.3 AT PoE. So PoE plus. So it will work with any sort of PoE plus power source. And it also does support AC power if you need to use that. This access point uses what is now our modern day current mounting system. So we give you a mounting bracket. That mounting bracket has been designed so it can be screwed in directly to an outlet box, to a square junction box, to a circular junction box. Can also be mounted directly to a ceiling or wall. And then if you have T-bar, we provide T-bar kits that you can buy optionally, which then allow you to mount the mounting bracket directly onto our T-bar adapters. And like the rest of our modern day access points, this product can be managed in the Nebula cloud. As I mentioned earlier, it comes with a 1-year ProPack license should you want to use the ProPack features. But it gives you access and the ability to start configuring your network before the hardware has been installed. No need to take the product out of the box to start configuring, and gives you basically global access to all of your networks and all of your customers for free. So just kind of to summarize here, what's going on here with the WBE530 access point. As I mentioned earlier, we've got 3 different methods of management: direct management, cloud management, or a local controller, which is built into our USG Flex and ATP series security hardware. The hardware itself is very durable. It comes with our lifetime warranty out of the box. We have our RF first technology in here to improve performance. We do not use any electrolytic capacitors, which is a common point of failure in solid state components. We have also designed our hardware specifically to help deal with heat fatigue over time, to help pull heat off of the board and components and vent it out of the top of the unit itself. And we also support what's called dual firmware. So basically, when you're doing a firmware update, if something interferes with it, there's no worry about the access point being bricked. Basically, the current firmware continues to run while you are downloading and installing the new firmware. And if anything should happen to prevent that installation from completing, it simply clears the new firmware and continues to operate and run on the old firmware. And then, of course, we've got all of our enterprise type security services here: WPA3, dynamic pre-shared key. If you're using our security hardware, we have our collaborative detection and response, which works with this access point, optional secure Wi-Fi features, etc. So if all of that sounds really familiar to you, it's because it is, and I'll discuss that right now with you. So here is our current now Wi-Fi 7 lineup. We've got 3 models: the NWA130BE, the WBE530, and the WBE660S. So let's talk about the main differences. Essentially, when it comes to features, the NWA130BE and WBE530 are essentially the same when it comes to the physical hardware. The WBE660S is our flagship. So you will see here it is basically twice the speed of the NWA and the WBE530. And it gets to double the speed because it's got basically supports up to 4 simultaneous data streams, whereas the NWA130BE and the WBE530 support 2 spatial streams. These guys here have a standard ceiling mount type antenna, whereas the WBE660S has smart antenna. It also adds Bluetooth low energy support for those types of applications. And then it's got a 10 gig uplink port to help support those faster speeds, right? In theory, you've got a data rate up to 20 gig, so you could expect, actual real world throughput to be about half of that. So you need a 10 gig port to be able to provide those speeds. Now, the trade-off, though, is that the WBE660S, one, it's going to cost a lot more, but 2, it also requires a lot more power to operate. So it requires PoE++ or 802.3 BT PoE power to power it up for full speed operation. So that's one of those things where there's still not a lot of switches out there that support that or have the budget to support a large deployment of WBE660Ss. Whereas the NWA130BE and WBE530 work on PoE Plus, which is very common. Is pretty much the standard these days on most PoE switches, even cheap, inexpensive, unmanaged switches that are out there. So it comes down to the question, why would I buy the WBE530 instead of the NWA130BE? And basically, it comes down to a couple things. First one is, if you're planning to use ProPack in your organization, if you're going to be using Nebula with ProPack, it may be more convenient to buy the hardware where the license is already associated with it. And when you add the device to your org, the license is automatically there for you. If you need to use local management through a local controller, obviously the NWA130BE does not support that, but the WBE530 does. So if you need to use a local controller for security reasons, for HIPAA reasons, for PCI reasons, or just because you don't like using the cloud, WBE530 is the way to go. And then what would normally be the third reason, which is our partner discounts. Normally there is no partner discount on NWA product. It was something that you would have to jump up to a W series to get that automatic partner discount. But we took that away just a couple months ago, where we added the partner discount exclusively here to the NWA130BE. So you now do get a partner discount on either one of these two models. So it just comes down to, do you want the convenience of a bundled Pro Pack, or do you need local management? Otherwise, just continue buying the NWA130BE. And so that, guys, that concludes our presentation. I told you it was going to be quick. There's not a lot of new ground to cover here. I don't have any questions. So let me just, if you have some, again, send them in using the question and answer part of the Zoom interface. And while I wait to see if any come in, just to highlight for you here, our YouTube channel is called Zyxel America channel. We are a multinational company. There are a lot of different Zyxel YouTube channels out there. So the one for North America is called Zyxel America channel. That's where you will find recordings of most of our webinars. So if you missed a webinar or had to drop out early or came in late, generally within 24 to 48 hours after a webinar, you will find it on our YouTube. You will also find video case studies there, best practices videos, promotional videos, etc. And then, of course, always feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn and link to us there, Zyxel US channel. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I am going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Thank you for coming out today and joining the presentation. If you do have some questions that come up, you can reach out to your salesperson, David, Andy, or Jacob, or you can email me directly, seanr@zyxel.com. Thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you at one of our future webinars. Thank you.